Okay, folks, we're on to the next mini lecture, and here we're going to be talking about the forces that shape carnivory, predator-prey dynamics, where animals eat animals, and I guess we could talk a little bit about where plants eat animals, right? So these are adaptations in predator-prey interactions. Adaptations and predator-prey interactions. So if we go back to one of the sort of grounding ideas of this chapter, it's that these interactions that we're talking about have a net positive impact on the consumer, on the fitness of the consumer, and a net negative impact on the fitness of the resource, right? And what I hope this makes you think a little bit about is the Eco-Evo chapters. We learned about sort of how fitness is driven, how natural selection, differences in fitness can drive natural selection, and ecology can impact that, right? And so if we're talking about these interactions in terms of net fitness effects, evolution can act here. Natural selection can act on variation in traits that shape the outcomes for predators and prey, right? So when predators increase consumption, high consumption, then they have high fitness, right? When prey can decrease, the adaptations of prey can decrease consumption and death, then we have higher fitness for them, right? So we expect evolution via natural selection, adaptation via natural selection, to increase traits in predators that maximize energy intake, that maximize their likelihood of participating in a consumptive predator-prey interaction, and the opposite is true for prey, right? The opposite is true for prey. There's a couple big, let's start by thinking about predators. What kinds of traits, what suites of traits predators have evolved? What are some patterns in the suites of traits predators have evolved as an adaptation to maximizing consumption? Your book covers sort of two broad classes of predators. We have active searchers, and we have sit and wait predators, also called ambush predators. I like to think of these as the grocery shoppers and the door dashers, right? The grocery shoppers and the door dashers. Some predators have evolved adaptations that make them really efficient at finding prey that are highly profitable, thinking about the optimal foraging stuff we've talked about previously, and maximizing their rate. Remember, we talk about rates of energy intake when we thought about behavioral ecology. Other predators have maximized the likelihood that food comes to them. They're really efficient at calling up their dasher, right? They don't move around a whole lot. They don't expend very much energy. They hide away really well. They often need to have camouflage that lowers their detection by prey. And they rely on encounter rates, right? They rely on encounter rates of sort of prey just moving around, right? So we have active searchers, we have sit and wait predators. And your book goes through a bunch of examples of these. Some cool ones are, for example, variation in spiders, right? Variation in spiders. So some of my favorite spiders are wolf spiders. If you go out at night in your yard, shine your light down in the grass, you'll see lots of little white flashes. Those are actively hunting wolf spiders. There's a whole bunch of different species of them. But these are predators that go out and hunt for food, right? They're crepuscular, nocturnal. They're acting sort of at twilight and at nighttime, and they're out searching for food, right? Alternatively, there are these ambush predators, right? Ambush predators like trapdoor spiders. Have you guys heard of these? That literally build burrows and hide away behind a trapdoor, and when prey walks by, they jump out and grab them, right? These are trapdoor spiders. Other kinds of cool spiders here are things like, jumping spiders. These are some of the cutest little spiders you'll see. We talked about them, or your book talked about them in terms of sexual selection, if you think back to the peacock spiders, right, that have all these sexual displays. But these are active search and hunt predators versus sit and wait predators like your golden silk spiders, right? These big, large web-making spiders that you might see out at Gumbo Limbo, right? These are trapdoor or orb weavers of all kinds, right? A lot of you have observed the spiny orb weaver, I think, in your iNaturalist experiments, right? And so these sort of toolkits, these strategies come with toolkits that increase capture success, right? So these are things like, I'm not going to go through these, your book lists a bunch of different things, but adaptations that are things that minimize detection, right? So for example, having highly camouflaged coloration, right? That makes their likelihood of being detected by prey much lower. They also evolve all sorts of traits that help them detect prey. You can think about sharks and their lateral lines that help them detect fish, right? They also tend to, especially in active searchers, evolve traits that help them maximize capture success, so they're often very quick, right? They're often very fast. They also evolve all sorts of social behaviors, cooperation, for example, in active hunters, for example, in wolves hunting in packs, right? And so I don't want to just sit and list traits, but you should learn some of these examples of traits and have some on the tips of your tongue if we, for example, ask for a suite of traits that might go with active search versus sit and wait predation strategies, right? Alternatively, prey have evolved all sorts of traits that minimize their likelihood of being eaten, right? That minimize their likelihood of being eaten. And just like there are active searching and sit and wait predators, there's all different sorts of classifications of strategies that prey may take to minimize their likelihood of that negative interaction happening first. So one sort of, I guess we call them suites of traits, right, are hiders, right? Hiders. These are animals that evolve camouflage, that rely on hiding from active predators via being low detectability, having low detectability, right? These are a classic example, I'm sure you learned in evolution, right, was the evolution of moths during the Industrial Revolution, where their coloration changed to match the deposition of soot on trees around industrial plants, right? Where we saw moths near industrial plants became much darker and peppered versus moths that evolved to live on birch trees that were much whiter and lighter, right? Like, this is the evolution of traits that minimize the likelihood that predator can see you, right? Alternatively, we have avoiders. I think the stereotypical one for a lot of us that grew up in the Northeast are white-tailed deer, right? They're highly alert. They've evolved all sorts of sensory traits that maximize their likelihood of detecting a predator, and they avoid being caught. They also have high escape velocities, all sorts of things that go along with that, right? And these both are pre-encounter mechanisms, right? So either you can be sure that you're not seen, you're a hider, or you can be sure that if you're seen, you're good at getting away, right? But what happens after that? There's also post-encounter mechanisms. So once a predator gets you, how do you stop them from killing and eating you, right? And these lead to some of my favorite adaptations of animals across the world, right? So you can avoid consumption mechanically, right? This is especially clear here in all sorts of mollusks, right? A lot of you have been using mollusks as your invertebrates for your ecology in action. This is a secret hint. If you haven't come to office hours, if you haven't talked to me, maybe you're watching the lectures. The best way to get invertebrates in South Florida, if you don't want to take pictures of bugs, is go take pictures of shells. So many invertebrates on the beach, right? These mollusks have developed all sorts of crazy strategies to defend themselves via hardened shells. They defend themselves mechanically, right? There's also chemical defenses, right? I gave you two examples of this in the previous lecture, but one clear example are newts in this big coevolutionary ring with garter snakes in California. And I also told you about monarch butterflies, right, which sequester plant toxins that make them highly unpalatable to carnivores, right? And so you can defend yourself in all sorts of crazy chemical ways. And the third, of course, is behavioral. And these are post-encounter mechanisms that minimize consumption. So they're often startle responses, right? Or, for example, dropping parts of your body. So anoles are a really good example of this, right? They have a physiological and behavioral mechanism where they drop a part of their body that leaves it as sort of like a tariff for the predator, but then that allows them to escape and not have the net negative impact on their fitness, right? I wanted to spend a little bit of time thinking about sort of warning and mimicry, right? So we've talked about active searchers, sit and wait predators. We've talked about prey and how they have pre-encounter and post-encounter mechanisms. And then I want to think a little bit about sort of coloration and camouflage. And this can be true both for predators and prey, right? Both for predators and prey. There's a couple key words I want you guys to learn here, so let's just do a coloration box. We have crypsis. This is a word you should learn. Crypsis, which is hiding, right? Which is being camouflaged. Crypsis is hiding. Don't be seen. Alternatively, we have things called aposematism. Aposematism. This is bright coloration, the opposite of crypsis. This is highly advertising, and often this is the case of advertising defense, right? People love, for example, poison dart frogs. Another great example are the caterpillars of monarchs that are bright yellow and black and white, highly aposematic. These often involve contrasting colors, bright colors, reds and oranges. And then there's a special case that when aposematism is happening, for example, we can have mimicry, right? Mimicry, where either we have coloration that a guild of organisms together that are all dangerous converge on, convergent evolution, convergent mimicry, right? Where lots of things who are toxic look the same, right? We also have non-convergent mimicry, right? Where we have non-toxic species looking like their toxic counterparts, right? Non-toxic species looking like their toxic counterparts, right? And there's all sorts of great cases of Batesian and Mullerian mimicry in nature. Some of my favorite ones involve, for example, velvet ants across the desert Southwest. So if you want to learn about that, come talk to me at office hours or something. Okay, the last thing I want to cover here is that all of these traits, we didn't cover chapter 9 or something that talked about life history trade-offs. And so I really want to emphasize this here, is that all of these suites of traits that go along with maximizing your fitness or minimizing your capture rate as a prey come with trade-offs, right? They come with trade-offs. That means that when selection, when we're thinking about evolutionary trade-offs, when selection favors one set of traits, it comes with costs in other contexts. Right? So a clear one here, right, could be that when animals evolve all of the physiological processes to process complex toxins, they show lower muscle ability, for example, right, to track down prey. This is a really common case in those newt and garter snake systems I was telling you about, where the garter snakes that are most tolerant of the newt's tetrodotoxins also have different trade-offs in their ability to catch prey, right? That there's a trade-off that being really resistant makes you less fast, for example, or something like that. I think that's the case in that one. Don't take me for sure. The concept there is good, though, that there are trade-offs, right? Okay, so key ideas here. Evolution is happening via natural selection all the time, especially in these predator-prey interactions, and there's suites of traits that you should know examples of that include active searchers or sit-and-wait predators, that include pre- and post-encounter mechanisms that minimize consumption for prey, and that include all sorts of crazy adaptations for coloration and chemistry, et cetera, for prey. So get some of those examples from your book. I hope that covers that. Woo!